The Galactic Council Chamber floated in the void between stars, a massive station where dozens of alien species came together to discuss trade, resolve disputes, and maintain what they called civilized order. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, with gravity fields adjusted for each species and translation devices that turned thousands of languages into meaning. Today, like most days, it was filled with the usual noise of galactic politics. Ambassador Sarah sat in the human delegation's pod, her hands folded neatly on the table before her. She had held this position for 6 years now, ever since humanity had been granted full membership in the Council. In that time, she had negotiated 17 trade agreements, settled disputes over mining rights, and had sat through countless hours of bureaucratic procedures that would have bored most people to tears. The humans were still considered newcomers by most species in the Council. 73 cycles was nothing compared to the thousands of years that elder races had been members. They had been part of the Council for over 4,000 cycles. The Theta Prime delegation could trace their membership back nearly 10,000. To them, humanity was a curious addition, interesting but ultimately minor. Had learned to accept the subtle condescension. The way elder species would speak slowly when addressing her, as if she might not understand complex concepts. The way they would smile, or whatever their species did to show amusement, when humans brought up concerns about galactic law. The younger species, they seemed to think, always worried too much about rules and fairness. They would learn in time that the galaxy ran on more practical considerations. But had played her role well. She had been patient, diplomatic, and endlessly procedural. She had filled out forms in triplicate, requested committee reviews, and never once raised her voice in the council chamber. If the elder species thought humans were bureaucratic and rules-obsessed, well, she had done nothing to discourage that impression. Her communication device vibrated against her wrist. She glanced down at it and her expression went very still. The message was short, just a few lines, but those lines changed everything. New Tasmania, orbital bombardment, ground invasion, 40,000 civilians. Initial casualty reports estimated at least 2,000 dead, with numbers rising. Read the message 3 times. Her hands, still folded on the table, did not shake. Her breathing remained steady. To anyone watching, she appeared calm, perhaps even disinterested in whatever message she had received. The current speaker was a trade minister, droning on about resource allocation in the outer territories. They were an old power, one of the mid-tier civilizations that had learned how to take what they wanted while staying just inside the boundaries of galactic law. They were efficient, ruthless, and utterly confident in their right to expand. Tapped a button on her console, requesting to speak. The council moderator, a crystalline being from Theta Prime, acknowledged her request with what might have been surprise. Humans rarely interrupted proceedings. The human delegation requests an emergency session, said, her voice perfectly level. Immediately. The moderator's crystalline structure shifted colors, processing this unusual request. Ambassador, the current session is scheduled to continue for another 3 standard hours. Emergency sessions require. Article 47 of the Council Charter, interrupted, grants any member species the right to call an emergency session in cases of unprovoked military action against their sovereign territory. I am invoking that article now. The chamber fell silent. Emergency sessions were rare, reserved for actual crises. The fact that a human was calling one was unexpected enough to capture everyone's attention. The moderator conferred briefly with their assistants. Very well, this session is suspended. Emergency session will convene in 1 standard hour. All council members are required to attend. Stood and walked out of the chamber without waiting for dismissal. Behind her, the whispers started. Speculation rippled through the assembled delegates like water. What had happened? The humans had been so quiet, so compliant. This was entirely out of character. 1 hour later, the council chamber was packed. Every major species had sent their senior representatives. Even species that rarely attended regular sessions had dispatched observers. The last human-called emergency session had been 12 years ago, when they were still applying for membership. Whatever this was, it was significant. Entered the chamber alone. Normally, human delegations included advisors, military liaisons, cultural. Today, it was just her, carrying nothing but a small data chip. She walked to the center speaking platform and inserted the chip into the holographic display system. The chamber's lights dimmed, and images appeared in the air above the assembled delegates. New Tasmania from orbit, a blue-green world with 2 small continents and scattered island chains. Population centers marked in soft light. Research stations, mining facilities, schools, hospitals, a peaceful colony world as peaceful as any in the galaxy. Then the images changed. Fire blooming in the atmosphere, orbital strikes hitting the surface with mathematical precision, cities burning. The footage was recent, less than 8 hours old. The damage was already catastrophic. At 0400 hours station time, said, the Confederation launched a military assault on New Tasmania, a human colony world in the expanse. They hit us with orbital bombardment followed by ground invasion forces. She changed the image, bodies in the streets, buildings collapsed, a school its walls blown open, small desks visible through the rubble. Current casualty count is 2,847 confirmed dead. 412 of those were children under the age of 12 standard years. The chamber was absolutely silent now. Even the usual background noise of translation devices and environmental systems seemed muted. The delegation sat in their pod, perfectly still. They had not expected this. The attack had been calculated, measured, well within the parameters of acceptable galactic warfare. Colonies in disputed territories were always fair game. The humans had been in the expanse for less than 20 cycles, hardly enough time to establish valid territorial claims. The attack was conducted according to galactic warfare protocols, the ambassador said, rising to speak. The colony was given opportunity to surrender. Non-combatant facilities were largely spared. This is a territorial dispute, nothing more. The humans are overreacting to standard military. We are withdrawing from all galactic treaties effective immediately, said, cutting him off. The silence that followed was different from before. This was the silence of shock, of minds struggling to process something that made no sense. The Theta Prime moderator's colors shifted rapidly. Ambassador, you cannot simply withdraw from council treaties. The procedures alone would take cycles to complete. There are committees, review boards, transition periods. We are withdrawing from all galactic treaties effective immediately, repeated, her voice unchanged. This includes trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, technology sharing protocols, and our membership in this council. She pulled the data chip from the holographic system and turned to face the assembled delegates. The Confederation has killed our children. We have nothing further to discuss. Walked out of the chamber, her footsteps echoed in the silence. No one moved to stop her. No one spoke. It took 30 seconds after she left for the chamber to erupt into chaos. The delegation was surrounded immediately by other species demanding explanations. The moderator tried to restore order, their crystalline form flashing through colors so rapidly it hurt to look at. Delegates shouted over each other in a dozen languages, their translation devices struggling to keep up. This is absurd, the military observer said, finally managing to be heard over the noise. Humans don't just walk away from negotiations. They're probably the most diplomatic species we've ever encountered. They love their procedures and committees. This is clearly theater. They'll come back with demands in a few days. Several delegates nodded agreement. This had to be posturing. Humans had spent 7 decades building relationships with galactic powers. They had invested enormous resources in trade networks, cultural exchanges, and technological cooperation. Walking away from all of that over a single colony, even one with significant casualties, made no strategic sense. They're trying to force us to negotiate from a position of guilt, a delegate from the Merchant Coalition suggested. They'll ask for reparations, probably territory, maybe even a council seat with veto power. It's actually rather clever. The ambassador was less certain. Did you see her face? He asked his advisors quietly. There was nothing there. No anger, no sadness, no rage, just emptiness. Humans are emotional creatures, his military advisor said dismissively. She was probably in shock. When they process what they're actually giving up, they'll come back to the table. But the ambassador had spent more time around humans than most species. He had negotiated with them, dined with them, even considered some of them friends. And something about its expression bothered him deeply. It hadn't been emptiness, he realized. It had been the calm before a storm. Across the galaxy, human vessels began disappearing from trade routes. Merchant ships recalled to Earth. Science expeditions abandoning long-term research stations. Diplomatic staff politely but firmly collecting their things and departing from embassies and consulates. The exodus happened with remarkable efficiency, as if it had been planned and rehearsed. Within 48 hours, there were almost no human ships in neutral space. The few that remained were moving toward human territory, declining all hails, refusing all communication. Earth itself went silent. The communication networks that had connected humanity to the galactic community for 7 decades simply stopped responding. Incoming messages were received but not answered. Diplomatic channels showed as active but empty. The Galactic Council tried everything. They sent delegations that were turned away at the borders of human space by automated defense platforms. They dispatched messages through every conceivable channel. They even considered sending a military escort to demand an audience, before wiser heads pointed out that forcing communication through military threat probably wasn't the best approach to de-escalation. Meanwhile, the Confederation celebrated their easy victory. New Tasmania was theirs, rich in resources and strategically positioned. The human response, or lack thereof, was seen as proof of their weakness. A species that would withdraw rather than fight was no threat at all. On the 5th day after its declaration, the Council of Lords met to discuss their next moves. If the humans were truly abandoning the region, there were 2 more colony worlds that could be seized. Small settlements, barely defended, containing valuable mining facilities. The decision was unanimous. The fleet would move immediately. The attack on station came 3 days later. 8,000 more humans taken prisoner, minimal resistance, another clean victory by galactic standards. The Council watched and waited for humanity's response. Surely now they would come back to negotiate. Surely now they would demand a ceasefire, propose mediation, suggest a conference to discuss terms. The silence from Earth continued, unbroken and absolute. 8 days had passed since walked out of the council chamber. 8 days of nothing but silence from one of the most talkative species in the galaxy. Then, on the 9th day, the galaxy learned what that silence had meant. The first indication that something was wrong came from the OV. Their primary military command center simply went dark. Not destroyed, not damaged, just offline. Every system, every screen, every communication relay shut down simultaneously at exactly 0600 hours station time. The backup command center took over within seconds, as designed. Then it went dark too. Across 3 star systems, 17 military installations lost power in a cascading wave of failures. Orbital defense platforms stopped responding to commands. Shipyards found their construction systems frozen mid-assembly. Even the automated defense satellites that ringed there simply stopped functioning. The military command tried everything. They sent technicians to physically access the systems. They attempted manual overrides. They even shut down and restarted entire facilities from scratch. Nothing worked. It was as if something had reached into the code itself and changed it at a fundamental level. Within 4 hours, the Confederation's military capability had been effectively neutralized. Their weapons were locked. Their shields wouldn't activate. Their ships could move barely, but couldn't fire a single shot. Then the message came. It broadcast on every frequency, in every known language, through every communication system in Council space. Even systems that had been powered down received it, somehow, the words appearing on screens that shouldn't have been able to display anything. You took our children, we have taken your future, your weapons are offline, your shields are down, your shipyards are scrap. This is not a negotiation, this is a notification. The Galactic Council erupted into panic. Emergency sessions were called, military advisors were summoned. Intelligence services scrambled to understand what had just happened. How had humanity done this? The Confederation had one of the most advanced military infrastructures in the galaxy. Their systems were protected by security measures that had been refined over thousands of years. Multiple species had tried and failed to hack networks. Yet somehow, in the span of a few hours, humanity had reached across light years and shut down an entire military power without firing a single shot. The Dominion saw opportunity. They were longtime rivals of the, competing for resources and influence in the same region of space. With the military neutralized, it was the perfect time to strike. The fleet mobilized from 3 staging areas, converging on territory. 200 warships, including their dreadnoughts, moved into position. It was the largest military deployment they had undertaken in a century. Earth's second message was directed specifically at them. Stand down or share their fate. The High Command reviewed the message in their war room, deep beneath the surface of their capital world. Around the table sat generals who had fought in a dozen campaigns, who had conquered systems and crushed rebellions. They looked at the human message and laughed. Humanity had good technology, yes. They had obviously developed some kind of advanced cyber warfare capability, but they were not the. Their systems were different, their security protocols more sophisticated, and more importantly, they had the most powerful conventional military in this sector of the galaxy. Admiral commanding the lead element of the fleet sent his response. Humanity makes threats it cannot back up. We do not fear you. Stand aside. 16 seconds later, his flagship's fusion core went critical. The explosion was massive, visible from 3 light minutes away. The blast wave took out 3 escort cruisers that had been too close. 6 more ships sustained heavy damage from debris and radiation. Across the fleet, ships began reporting system failures. Navigation locked, weapons offline, life support flickering, fusion cores showing instabilities that shouldn't have been possible. Their safety systems had been designed to prevent exactly this kind of failure. In the remaining 190 ships, captains faced a terrible choice. Continue forward with crippled vessels, or retreat and pray that whatever had taken control of their systems would let them go. The fleet retreated. In the council chamber, delegates watched the tactical displays in stunned silence. 2 of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy had been neutralized in less than a day. They were completely disabled. They had fled in disorder. And still, no one had seen a single human warship. How? The Theta Prime moderator whispered, their crystalline structure dim with shock. How is this possible? An analyst from the Merchant Coalition pulled up data files, hands shaking as they worked. I think I'm beginning to understand. Look at this. 7 years ago, humanity shared their new computer core technology with us. It was more efficient, more powerful than what we had been using. Within 3 years, nearly every major installation in Council space had incorporated human-designed systems. The analyst pulled up more files. 5 years ago, they developed a new approach to network security, shared it freely. We all adopted it because it was better than what we had. 4 years ago, their quantum communication protocols. 3 years ago, their data compression algorithms. Around the chamber, delegates began accessing their own records, tracing back through years of technological exchange. The humans had been remarkably generous with their innovations. They had shared freely, asked for little in return, and seemed genuinely interested in helping other species improve their infrastructure. They didn't just share technology, the analyst continued, voice hollow. They became part of our infrastructure. Every computer system, every network, every communication relay, they all have human code at their foundation now. We invited them in. The implications hung in the air like poison. For 7 decades, while playing the role of diplomatic newcomers, humans had quietly woven themselves into the technological fabric of galactic civilization. Every gift, every innovation, every helpful suggestion had been another thread in a web so vast that no one had noticed it being built. The ambassador sat in his pod, his earlier confidence completely gone. "The colony attacks," he said quietly. "We thought they would negotiate. We thought they would follow galactic protocols." "They did give a warning," someone said. It was a junior delegate from a minor species, someone who usually never spoke in council sessions. "Ambassador told us exactly what was happening. She said they were withdrawing from all treaties. She said they had nothing further to discuss. We just didn't understand what that meant." The chamber fell silent as delegates reviewed the recording of his brief statement. They watched it again and again, looking for something they had missed. But there was nothing to miss. She had been perfectly clear. The humans were done talking. 3 more opportunistic species who had been preparing to raid territory quietly stood down their fleets. The merchant coalition canceled all planned military operations. Even the Theta Prime Defense Force, which hadn't seen combat in over 1,000 years, began running security reviews of their own systems. Because now they understood. Humanity didn't need to threaten. They didn't need to warn. They had spent 7 decades in a position of absolute dominance, and everyone had been too blind to see it. The Council's military analyst presented their findings to the full assembly. The report was devastating. Nearly 70% of all military systems in Council space relied on human technology in some capacity. Civilian infrastructure was even more compromised. Over 90% of all computer systems had human code somewhere in their operations. "Can we remove it?" someone asked. "Can we purge the human systems and rebuild with our own technology?" The analyst's expression said everything. It would take years, maybe decades. The human code is integrated at such a fundamental level that removing it would require completely rebuilding our infrastructure from the ground up. And during that time, our systems would be vulnerable, unstable. Entire civilizations could collapse. A delegate from the Merchant Coalition stood. "What about military action? Could we strike at Earth directly, force them to negotiate?" "With what?" the analyst asked simply. "Which fleet do you trust to make it through human space when they can shut down your ships with a thought? Which weapons would you use when they designed half the components?" The question hung unanswered. On the 13th day after his declaration, a new message arrived from Earth. It was longer than the previous communications, and it came with an attachment, a detailed list of demands. No, not demands, requirements. The Confederation would be dissolved. Their territory would be redistributed to the 3 species they had conquered and subjugated over the centuries. Every citizen who had participated in the New Tasmania attack would be remanded to human custody for trial. But it was the final requirement that truly shocked the Council. Humanity demanded the right to enforce a new galactic law, one that would supersede all existing treaties. Any species that attacked civilian populations, any civilians, not just human ones, would face immediate human military response. Humanity was not asking to join the Council's peacekeeping forces. They were not requesting authorization to act. They were informing the Council that they would act, with or without approval. "This is unacceptable," the military observer said, finding his voice. "You're demanding the right to be judge, jury, and executioner for the entire galaxy. What gives you that authority?" The response came from an unexpected source. Not ambassador, but from Admiral, head of Earth's Combined Fleet Command. His image appeared in the center of the council chamber, life-sized and imposing. "What gives us that authority?" repeated. "The same thing that gave the authority to attack our colony. The same thing that gave you authority to send your fleet into their territory while they were weakened. Power. The only difference is, we're not pretending it's anything else." He gestured, and tactical displays filled the chamber. Ships in deep space, dozens of them, positioned at strategic points around key systems. They had been there for years, apparently, hiding in the vast emptiness between stars. "These are observer platforms," continued. "Unmanned, mostly automated. They've been watching, listening, recording everything. We know which species have been raiding each other's territory while claiming peaceful intentions. We know which governments have been suppressing smaller species to maintain control. We know where the bodies are buried, metaphorically and literally." More displays, communication intercepts, satellite imagery, financial records, a mountain of intelligence that humanity had been quietly gathering for decades. "We came to the Council believing in the idea of galactic cooperation," said. "We wanted to be part of something bigger than ourselves. We shared our technology, we opened our borders, we played by your rules. And the first time someone decided we were weak enough to attack, you all sat back and watched it happen." No one argued. It was true. The Council had treated the New Tasmania attack as a simple territorial dispute, nothing worth emergency intervention. By galactic standards, it had been routine. "So here's the new reality," continued. "You can accept our terms or you can try to fight us. But understand this. If you fight, you won't be fighting against our ships or our soldiers. You'll be fighting against your own infrastructure. Every computer, every network, every system you depend on will turn against you." The Council sat in silence, processing the ultimatum. It wasn't really a choice at all. Admiral's image faded, leaving the Council to their deliberations. The debate that followed lasted for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Species after species stood to voice their acceptance of human terms. Some did so reluctantly, others pragmatically. A few even seemed relieved, as if the galaxy had been waiting for someone to enforce the rules that everyone claimed to follow but rarely did. The vote, when it finally came, was unanimous. Not because everyone agreed, but because everyone understood that disagreement was no longer an option. In the aftermath, as delegates filed out of the chamber, the from Theta Prime, an elder being who had served on the Council for over 600 cycles, approached the human delegation's pod. Ambassador had returned for the vote, though she had not spoken during the debate. "May I ask you something?" they said, their crystalline structure pulsing with colors that indicated complex thought. "When you first came to the Council all those years ago, did you already know? Did you plan for this?" Considered the question carefully. "We hoped it would never be necessary. We genuinely wanted to be part of the galactic community as equals, following the established rules and traditions. But we're human. We've been fighting wars since before we had written language. We know what happens when you trust that peace will last just because everyone says it will. So you prepared for the worst." "We prepared for reality," corrected. "We looked at galactic history, all those treaties and laws you're so proud of, and we saw how often they were ignored when it was convenient. We saw how elder species treated younger ones. We saw the pattern of exploitation dressed up as civilization." The colors shifted to something that might have been sadness. "And now you've taken control." "No," said firmly. We've taken responsibility. There's a difference. Control would mean ruling over you, making decisions for you. Responsibility means enforcing the rules that everyone claims to follow but rarely does. The rules against attacking civilian populations, against genocide, against the kind of casual cruelty that species inflict on each other because they can. And who watches the watchmen? They asked. Who enforces rules against humanity when you break them? It was a fair question and didn't dodge it. That's the risk you're taking by accepting our terms. We might become the very thing we're trying to prevent. We might abuse this power. But right now, you have a choice between the system you had, where might made right and the strong preyed on the weak, or a system where someone is powerful enough to actually enforce consequences. There was quiet for a long moment. Your admiral said you know where the bodies are buried. Are you planning to use that information? Only if we have to, said. Every species has things they're not proud of. We're not interested in public trials or humiliation. We're interested in making sure those things don't happen again. That's surprisingly merciful, given what they did to your people. His expression hardened slightly. The who were responsible will face justice, but their entire species didn't attack New Tasmania. Their children didn't bomb our schools. We're not monsters. We're just done pretending that talking nicely will stop people from killing our kids. 3 months later, the transition was complete. The Confederation had been formally dissolved, their territory redistributed as humanity had demanded. The trials of those responsible for the New Tasmania attack were ongoing, conducted by human tribunals but open to galactic observers. The proceedings were fair, meticulous, and absolutely damning. The galaxy adjusted to its new reality slowly. Trade continued, though now every shipment passed through human customs protocols. Disputes were still settled through the Council, but with the understanding that certain lines could not be crossed without consequences. And gradually, reports of piracy, raids on civilian populations, and opportunistic attacks on weaker species dropped to almost nothing. Not because species had suddenly become more moral, but because they knew someone was watching, someone with the power and will to respond. The human fleet remained largely invisible. Those deep space platforms that had revealed were just the beginning. Humanity had ships, weapons, and capabilities that they chose not to display. The threat was more effective than the demonstration would have been. In the council chamber, debates continued much as they always had. Species argued over trade rights, territorial boundaries, and resource allocation. But there was a new undercurrent to the discussions, a carefulness that hadn't existed before. Because now, every delegate knew that humanity was listening, watching, and capable of reaching into their systems if they stepped too far over the line. Ambassador resumed her duties, still diplomatic, still procedural, still filling out forms in triplicate. But now, when she spoke, people listened with a different kind of attention. The quiet newcomer had revealed herself to be the most dangerous player in the game. On Earth, in a classified military facility buried beneath several miles of rock, Admiral reviewed reports with his command staff. The integration was proceeding as planned. Human ships were being positioned throughout Council space, officially as part of a new peacekeeping mandate, but actually as a permanent military presence. Sir, one of his analysts said, we're getting reports that several species are beginning to develop isolated computer systems, trying to create networks that we can't access. Nodded, he had expected this. Let them. As long as they're not using those systems for military purposes or planning attacks on civilian populations, we don't need to stop them. We're not trying to control every aspect of galactic civilization. Some of the brass are worried that we might be overextended, another officer said. We've taken on responsibility for policing billions of beings across hundreds of systems. The logistics alone are manageable, said firmly. Because we're not actually policing day-to-day activities. We're drawing clear lines and making sure everyone knows we'll respond if they cross those lines. Most species are perfectly capable of behaving themselves if they know the consequences are real. He pulled up a tactical display showing human ships and platforms scattered across the galaxy. It looked like a lot, but it was actually remarkably efficient. Humanity had learned the lesson that every successful power learns eventually. You don't need to fight everyone to maintain order. You just need to fight one or two examples in such an overwhelming fashion that no one else wants to test you. They attacked New Tasmania because they thought we were weak, continued. They saw our diplomacy, our patience, our willingness to negotiate, and they mistook it for weakness. We needed to correct that impression permanently. And if another species decides to test us, the analyst asked. Then we do it again, said simply. As many times as it takes until the message is clear, but I suspect we won't have to. The galaxy is full of ambitious species, but very few of them are stupid. Back on Theta Prime, the WHO had spoken with convened a private meeting with several other elder delegates. They represented some of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, species that had seen empires rise and fall. The humans have created something new, one of them said. Not an empire, not exactly. They're not conquering territory or demanding tribute, but they've established a kind of hegemony that's never existed before. The question is whether it will last, another delegate said. History shows us that all powers eventually decay. The humans might be benevolent enforcers now, but what about in 100 cycles, 1,000? The Theta Prime shifted colors thoughtfully. I spoke with Ambassador after the vote. She acknowledged the risk. They know they might become what they're trying to prevent. And yet they took the power anyway. Because someone had to, they said. That's what troubles me most. They're right. The old system wasn't working. We had laws and treaties that everyone violated whenever it was convenient. The weak suffered while the strong prospered. The humans simply made explicit what was always implicit, that power is what matters and they have it. So what do we do? They considered the question. We watch, we wait, and we hope that their idealism survives their power. In the meantime, we follow their rules because they're not actually bad rules. Don't attack civilians. Don't commit genocide. Don't exploit those weaker than you. These are principles we all claim to believe in anyway. And if they fail, if humanity becomes corrupt or tyrannical, then we'll have a new problem, they admitted. But right now, dealing with human hegemony is preferable to dealing with chaos. At least they're trying to create order, not just accumulate power for its own sake. Years passed. The galactic community adapted to what came to be called the Pax Terra, the peace of Earth. It wasn't a perfect peace. There were still disputes, still conflicts, still crime and corruption. But the large-scale atrocities that had once been routine became rare. Species that had been suppressed under the old system found new opportunities to grow. The three races that had been subjugated by the flourished in their newfound independence, protected by the implicit guarantee that humanity would not allow them to be conquered again. Trade increased as piracy decreased. Scientific cooperation expanded as species felt safer sharing information. The galactic economy grew more stable with the understanding that humanity would not allow major disruptions to spiral into warfare. And humanity, for its part, held to its principles. When a human colony governor was found to be exploiting a native population on a newly discovered world, humans themselves arrested him and put him on trial. When human corporations were caught attempting to manipulate markets, they faced penalties as severe as those imposed on alien species. The Council watched these developments with cautious optimism. Perhaps humans could be trusted with the power they had taken. Perhaps their idealism would survive after all. But in the deep spaces between stars, human ships continued their silent watch. And in facilities across Earth and its colonies, intelligence analysts continued monitoring every communication, every transaction, every movement of every major power. Because humanity had learned its lesson well, peace wasn't something you achieved once and then forgot about. Peace was something you maintained, constantly and carefully, by making sure that those who would break it understood the consequences. Ambassador, now elderly but still serving the council, sometimes reflected on how things had changed. She remembered the day she had walked out of the council chamber, carrying the weight of thousands of dead civilians and the knowledge of what was to come. Some called it the day humanity revealed its true nature. Others called it the day the galaxy grew up. Simply called it the day she stopped hopping that good intentions were enough. On New Tasmania, a memorial stood where the first school had been destroyed. Children played nearby, under the watchful eyes of parents who had survived the attack. Life had returned to the colony, though the scars remained. Above the planet, in high orbit, a human warship maintained its station. It would remain there for decades, a permanent reminder and guardian. Not because anyone expected another attack, though we're broken, and no one else was fool enough to try, but because humanity wanted everyone to remember what had happened when someone crossed their line. In the end, the galaxy had learned a simple truth that humanity had known for thousands of years. Some people only understand one language, the language of consequences, the language of power applied swiftly and without hesitation. Humanity had hoped to never need to speak that language. They had tried diplomacy first, patience, negotiation, all the civilized tools that the Council prided itself on. But when those tools failed, when their children died because someone thought humans would talk rather than act, they had shown the galaxy what humans had always been capable of. And the galaxy was better for it, even if some species would never admit it. The strong still had power, but now they had responsibility. The weak still struggled, but now they had protection. And the rules that everyone claimed to follow were now enforced by someone with the capability to back them up. It wasn't the galaxy humanity had hoped for, but it was the galaxy they had created, one deliberate choice at a time, over 7 decades of preparation that no one had noticed until it was too late. The Pax Terra would last as long as humanity held to its principles. And humanity, having seen what happened when principles gave way to convenience, was determined to hold on for as long as they possibly could. Because they had learned the hardest lesson of all. The price of peace is eternal vigilance, and the cost of safety is the willingness to act when others will not.